Hey Prashant. Hey, can you hear me? One second, my battery is dying. Just a second.
Yeah.
Hey Rajesh, can you hear me?
Yeah, Naveen.
Okay. Well, Prashant is also
Yeah.
wait for a couple of minutes and then let's get started.
Okay.
Hey Prashant, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Naveen. Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
So shall we start or no, we're waiting for someone?
Just a couple of minutes. I think as others join. Just one more minute and we'll get started.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, just give me a minute. I'll just join from my phone. My laptop is somehow acting up. Hello. Hey Rajesh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, Naveen.
Okay, I think we can get started.
Sure.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. So we have Prashant with us from BizCraft Advisors. I'll just give a brief intro about Prashant, and then we can get started. Prashant was enrolled as a member of ICAI in 2012. He did his graduation from Pune University in 2009 and is an alumni of Symbiosis College, Pune. He leads the Bangalore team. He has certification on forensic accounting and fraud detection from Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He has rich experience in various types of audit, which include statutory audit, tax audit, internal audit, cooperative societies audit. His ability to understand the business environment, coupled with his sound financial and accounting background, has enabled him to specialize in conducting statutory audits of companies. He has varied experience in all areas of audit, investigation, due diligence, taxation, company matters for both domestic and foreign companies. He has extensive experience in advising various startups which are bootstrapped or funded by various VCs like Kalari, Nexus, Axel, Bloom, Landmark Group, and entities acquired by private equity firms like Turn River Capital, NASDAQ listed companies, Deloitte, etc. Prashant also has helped us from incorporation till acquisition of our last company. He's a very good friend, and he's my go-to person for all any issue related to compliance for startups. Please make this session as interactive as possible. Some of it you already know, but these compliance for startups is one of the main topics where due diligence actually get delayed or and it is very important for funding. Thanks, Prashant, for taking the time. Over to you.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Naveen kind of read out the brief background of mine from a article which I had given to him. But yeah, so I'll quickly just give a background of mine in a minute, and I think which is relevant to the topic we are going to talk about today. And then I will share a slide and maybe kind of brief you about the things we are going to talk today, and then we can towards the end of it we can have a question answer session relevant to the topic which we discussed here. So about me, so I am a qualified chartered accountant who has been practicing for close to 10 years now, almost 10 years now. And, we've been dealing mostly with, with the startups from the incorporation till the Series A, Series B, and, at different levels of acquisition, or for that matter, investment, and most of the startups are, into the domain of, software, which could be services as well as SaaS, product development entities, and some e-commerce enterprises, and then the other conventional CA practice wherein some other things, other clients we are handling, but those are like some accounts which are not the conventional business, basically like the music industry, film industry, like that. So that is the background of clientele which I've been part of. And I mean, considering starting of the incorporation, after the incorporation, there's a lot of confusion about what do we do as a compliance, whom should we go to for the finance. And obviously finance in the beginning, like for the first first time founder, it's like not that important until there's a notice coming from the department, or for the matter there's a due diligence done by done in any of the rounds, which could be a a angel round, or a let's say seed round, or pre series A round, or series A round. So until then, if there's no notice or there's no follow-up from any department, generally the founders are not really, for the first time founders, are not really kind of very much interested in actually structuring the finance that much. And sometimes, in my past experience, I've noticed sometimes, I would say maybe 2 out of 10 cases wherein the whole funding thing goes for a toss due to the red flags in the due diligence in the financial process, basically. It could be a legal issue, it could be some tax issue or something, wherein these issues become so material after a certain point of time that it is difficult for the company to go back and correct it. And uh, I know I'm aware about a couple of startups wherein this has happened, right, from GST to to FDI, or to, for that matter, a basic thing like a provident fund compliance. These are things wherein basically people think that things are being taken care, and let me save some cost here, get a consultant who's kind of suggesting me some shortcut options right now. And in towards the end of it, you get a feeling that better if it was that it was handled properly, these headaches could have been avoided. I'm kind of advising couple of clients wherein their CAs are I'm kind of managing their uh, books regularly, but at the level of at the time of due diligence, they're struggling, and we're kind of advising them to correct the process there. So this is the background of what we're going to discuss about. Most of the things you guys would have come across or would have heard of, but just to summarize, and then you know I will also add some points over the points here mentioned in the screen which I share. And post that any specific questions I will answer it for you, and so that you are prepared for the next thing. And for any detailed discussion, we can obviously discuss this post the call one on one. So I'll just share my screen right now. So I hope my screen is visible to you.
Yes, Prashant, we can see it.
Yeah. So basically, I have actually in particularly kind of prepared a presentation for you, considering some things, summarizing the points so that we can cover up it in this time, because it's a very vast thing. But to just make sure that we touch all the points, and then the specifics is what we can discuss towards the end of it. So if you see, there are certain post incorporation, so there are certain licenses and registrations which generally all organizations should have. I will also circulate this PPT later on, but through Naveen. But not that I'm going to read this out, but I think these are points which are there. But there are certain licenses which should have, like, if you look at shop and establishment, that is basically from a labor law angle, you should have it. And it is state driven. Basically, every state will have different kinds of shop and establishment certificate with different conditions around it, basically. Similarly, there's a state driven tax which is in Hyderabad, in Chennai, in Maharashtra, in Bangalore. Profession tax is there, wherein which is just deducted from employees' salary and paid to the government. In NCR, which is like around Delhi, Chandigarh, and I mean NCR plus, I'm saying Chandigarh or North. Generally, the profession tax is mostly not applicable in certain certain states like Gurgaon, and if you talk about Noida, Delhi, Chandigarh, it is not applicable. But otherwise, mostly on all other states, you'll have profession tax license, which is required for an employer to pay tax to the local state government. Especially when you're registered under GST, you will get notices if you do not register for profession tax. So that is there.
Prashant, quick question.
Yeah.
Is it this is required even when you're not making revenue?
Yes, this is actually as soon as you get incorporated within 30 days, ideally. Like, obviously it differs state-wise, but the general thing is that within 30 days from the date of incorporation, you should immediately have it registered. Have the entity registered for this. Otherwise, you end up paying interest and penalty along with the notice tomorrow, at a later date when somebody questions you on this. So as soon as, because how the department will get to know is now they have kind of merged the state tax. I hope you guys are aware that GST earlier was actually service tax and VAT. So VAT was state specific and service tax was central tax which was there. Now they have merged that, with this. And if you are registered for GST, but you're not registered for profession tax, and the state has profession tax law enacted, then 100% you're going to get notice, sometime or later. The later they send, the more penalty you accrue. So generally people don't pay attention to this because nobody troubles you on a day-to-day basis, but you are going to get that notice. And this becomes an important factor when you're actually going through a due diligence later on for a audit, for a due diligence activity. So these things are, state specific, as I mentioned. Now I'll go to the next point, which is their import-export code. This is actually required when you're exporting or importing certain services or goods, whatever. So in that case, it is mandatory for you to have an import and export code license. And nowadays you also have to renew it starting 30th of June 21. Every year you have to renew the import export code license, otherwise it gets locked automatically. Now GST, as I mean, most of you would be already aware that, for you to kind of transact, you need to have a GST number. Otherwise, when you're dealing with somebody who's an MNC and you crossed a turnover, then basically those customers would not entertain you much. So that's mostly if you cross a certain turnover, it is 20 lakhs and 40 lakhs for the people other than service, basically. So if you cross that turnover, you are supposed to get registered for GST. Similarly, LUT is a part of the GST.
Sorry, quick question.
Yeah.
There are a few startups who are exporting in a very small scale components from abroad. How does the import-export code applicable to them?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter what is the volume you're doing for the import or export. If you are exporting, you are supposed to have an import-export code license. Otherwise, not immediately, but on a certain date when you scale up, then the government comes back and says they don't recognize your export as export. So whatever benefit you're getting, for calling by calling yourself an exporter would be taken away when they send you a notice. So
what about importing? If it's importing component.
Import as well. So as a business, when you're importing, you are supposed to have, if it's a normal transaction for you, you're supposed to have an import export code. Though they do not kind of really, I would say, trouble you on a day-to-day basis when you're doing it one-time activity and all. But let's say you're buying something from outside, selling it, you definitely need to have an import export code. You are buying something from outside, working on it, and then selling that product, you definitely need to have an import export code. So like you just bought something for one time, they are not going to trouble you that much unless you're clearing it through the custom. So when you go to the custom, they're going to ask you for the import export license. Otherwise, they will not allow you to import it in the name of the company, basically. So this is a very small, I mean, if you look at it, this cost and all for these licenses are not much. People ignore it from the cost perspective, but these are something which are one-time things wherein you need to have these things, to avoid unnecessary issues in the future. Now, adding to that export thing, if you see, I was just talking about the next point. So LUT. So LUT is actually a part of GST. So when you are actually exporting, then in that case, to claim GST as exempt, in case of export, you need to take LUT every year. You will renew that every year by applying it online from the GST portal. Otherwise, you can't claim a particular transaction as export. So that there are certain theoretical conditions to classify something as export, but one of them, which was introduced in GST, is the LUT thing. So it's called letter of undertaking to be filed with the GST department on an annual basis. If you do not file it, you will have to pay the GST along with you have to pay IGST, even though you are exporting. So this is something which I have come across very recently. There was a startup who did a service export of around 3 crores of rupees, and by mistake they had not taken LUT, and imagine 18% of that was supposed to be paid. Now tomorrow you take LUT, go back and claim that refund, so your money gets stuck there basically. So that is also a very important license for you to have on a yearly basis. Now EPFO and ESIC is more like your employee count driven things and labor law related things which are there, wherein if you are crossing 20 employee or more, on a particular date, you are supposed to get registered for EPFO. ESI, again, it's a 10 employee or more if you are having, and if you have any employee who's having a salary less than 21,000, you are supposed to have If both the conditions are met, you're supposed to have this registration. Now, these days, I don't know, some of you would have incorporated an entity recently. So since last 8 to 10 months, along with the company incorporation, now government is by default registering you with EPFO and ESIC registration, which was not the case earlier. And which what it means is you still need to comply with the regulations, based on certain exemptions given here. For example, if you do not cross 20 employee, you still need to file nil return, but you have to file the returns. ESIC, if within 6 months you do not cross the applicable limit, you don't have to file the return, but after 6 months you have to file the nil return. So that's something which has become a headache for the all the startup entities which have been incorporated post last, I believe, last October or so. So this is like coming as a by default package along with the incorporation certificate, though many people are not even aware about it, because you have to go and ask, you have to register a ticket to get this certificate, but it's already registered along with the incorporation. To get the certificate, you need to reach out and get the certificates. So this is something which you should also be aware about it, even though limit is not crossed, because you still need to do the filing of nil returns here, basically. Now, Startup India registration is something wherein it is not having any kind of disadvantage when you don't register it. But if you register, you will have advantages, at different levels. Wherein, for example, if you are taking angel investment, the angel tax would not be kind of applicable to you. If you are, doing some profit, so if you are eligible as a startup for claiming your income to be export as well, claiming your income to be exempt under income tax, then first 3 years out of 7 years will be you can be eligible to claim your profit as exempted, subject to you are allowed by the DIPP to claim this exemption. So it is a benefit for you to take it. Obviously, you don't get it just like that. You have to prepare a proper deck about it and present it to the government. They will ask some questions and then they approve it. So once you are approved, then you have to separately apply for these exemptions, especially the angel tax, which was something which was like a havoc for the startup industry between 2014 till 2018, early 18, 19, because that's when they brought up this thing with a retrospective effect, wherein if you're a recognized startup, and you have filed an exemption for that startup, then in that case, you will not be questioned on the angel tax thing. Otherwise, all the income tax departments officers were raising notices to all the entities. Not even single entity was left that time if you have raised a fund in India. So that was one of the other things which you should have as a benefit. MSME again is a benefit thing, because generally in a startup is recognized as MSME, and you take that registration, you become a priority vendor for their customers to pay, especially the MSME, especially the MNC customers who have to comply with the MSME guidelines. Otherwise, they are supposed to pay you interest as well. So this is also recommended for this. There's no return filing required for this here, but you need to you take this registration to claim the benefit of receiving your payments within the timeline as per the payment terms of the contract, basically. Otherwise, if they don't pay, they are supposed to pay interest to you, at the rates prescribed by the MSME Act. Trademark license is something which is more of a, if you want to protect your trademark, then that's where you should go for something like trademark. It's more of a need-based thing rather than a compliance-based requirement. So that is what it is. So these are like licenses and registrations which all the organizations these days are supposed to have. There's not much exemption on this except one or two.
Excuse me, Prashant.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the startup registration, and then you mentioned about one benefit, which is tax exemption. In 7-year bracket, there was a tax exemption in that you have to prepare a DAC and send it to the ministry, and then there will be reviews and all. How, I mean, I tried to talk to someone for that. How easy it is, I mean, for a software startup.
So claiming the exemption is not that easy. First of all, you have to get yourself recognized as a startup, basically. Okay.
Yeah, so startup registration was pretty easy, but after that tax exemption, I was told that it's like you have to be innovating something, and then, I mean, what I was told is like almost impossible for a software startup. So is it like, can you just give some example?
Yeah. So it's not that easy. So as I said, so first is recognition, second is claiming the exemption for the angel tax. These two things are easy. Okay, but recognizing, because the law, the manner in which they have prepared the qualification for you to get exempted is like you have to submit the last 3-year balance sheet, P&L balance sheet, and all those things. So that itself is contradictory to the to the exemption rules which they have given. So there are not many people who would have got it. It's actually to the link is what they are getting basically. But if you ignore that exemption also, there are other benefits like the angel tax, which is something which is extraordinary. Because if you take an investment from somebody who's giving you, let's say, 1 crore investment, and you are getting let's say the face value of the share is, let's say, 10,000 for that. Earlier, definitely you are going to get a notice if you are not registered for that. So that is a benefit, something which is extraordinary, and that gives you a lot of cushion to take angel tax investment without a question being raised by department. Now, coming back to your main point, wherein you claiming the exemption for the profit, generally people, the startups, 9 out of 10 startups would not qualify for the criteria what they have listed down, wherein you have to have 3 years of balance sheet produced to them, and they evaluate, and then they give by basis on that. And they are saying, but 3 years out of 7 years will get it. So without completing 3 years, how will you give the balance sheet? So they reject that in that. So you have to actually kind of submit and then interact with them. So it's very difficult practically to get a exemption for income tax profit under Startup India, but other benefits are comparatively easier to be obtained basically.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, yes, even you're not even the balance sheet, but you have to prove that you are basically innovating to the lines of
So innovating and other things which are there, those are things which you need to actually, that is comparatively easier.
I don't know.
Have a proper good deck and all. For yourself to be recognized as a startup, basically, you need to prepare that deck and submit, and there are different what do you call pages on the portals where you have to go and put details about how innovative you are, at what stage your product is, what is the what are you going to bring to the society, what is the social well-being you are doing. All those things you have to kind of fill when you're filling the form of the registration for startup. So these are two different things. Once you register, then only you become eligible to apply for exemptions like the angel tax, or for that matter the income tax profit exemption, or for any other benefit like a grant from Startup India. There are if you are a biotechnology company, you are also eligible to get some grants up to 50 lakhs and all they'll give you basically. So in that, the most difficult exemption to be claimed is the profit one, but the others are fairly easy to be obtained if you are recognized as a startup. If you ask me, I think till now, whatever deck we've helped the client to prepare, none of the deck have been rejected so far, because we know what they're expecting in that. So we help preparing that. So claiming the getting the exemption for Startup India, if your product is actually, if you can explain it in a proper presentable format, I think you'll get it. Until unless you are not a subsidiary to a foreign entity. If you're a subsidiary to the foreign entity, you will not get registered for startup. Even if they register you, they will tomorrow come and give you a retrospective cancellation also. But post that, only profit exemption is something which is difficult basically. So shall I go to the next slide?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So there are certain compliances which you need to do on a one-time basis apart from the licenses. Generally these are things which are generally missed by the startup. So I've tried to kind of summarize things in a manner wherein if you actually refer this list, you should be able to kind of avoid most of the non-compliance which an entity is doing these days, and they're not aware basically. So something like you have to have a first board meeting to be done within the 30 days of incorporation. You need to appoint the first auditor in that first board meeting basically. You have to intimate if at the time of incorporation, if you have not if you have just mentioned your address as the address for communication purpose and not as a registered office purpose, because you don't have the agreement in your hand, then you have to file within the 30 days of incorporation. You have to file it with the ROC, the agreement, along with the registered office clause and the form basically within 30 days from the incorporation. you need to, this is the most important thing which people miss these days is, after incorporation, you go to someone, any CA, CS and all, they say, okay, your company is incorporated, happy, everything is sorted out. But the most important thing is you're supposed to ask them, can you help me get the share certificates for the shares subscribed by the subscribers in the MOA, the memorandum of article, because that is something which generally people don't give it. It will cost, it is no extra cost as such, only 50 rupees, 100 rupees will be there. But this becomes a very important factor when the DD happens, or tomorrow when you have to transfer your shares to somebody, this document is required. So you have to go backdate and do it, and you have to pay some adjudication fees and other things to kind of correct this error. So, and that fees is up to 10 times basically of the stamp duty, and it becomes a bottleneck also in the legal due diligence. So this is a very small point that everyone knows, that I become an owner of the share, but the owner has to be through the share certificate, and people don't take that share certificate after incorporation. So this is something you should keep in mind. Similarly, this is something which is a very new thing which was brought up. They have given some relaxation during the pandemic, but you need, as soon as you open the bank account of the company post incorporation, you are supposed to deposit the subscription money and then file a form with the ROC. If you do not do it, the law when it was brought in basically was not, a bank is not supposed to do a transaction for you until this is filed with the department. You're supposed to give the form to them. Theoretically, this is the law, but because of pandemic, they've given some relaxation now. But this is a standard law wherein if you have not filed this form, you will not have anything. The bank will, even though account is open, you cannot do a transaction through bank basically. So then you have to conduct the first annual general meeting of the company within 9 months of the first financial year. This is the there is a 3 months grace provided in the case of first year of AGM. In other years, you have to do it within 6 months basically. So that is there. Again, this is basically you have to file that for auditor. You can now file and appoint an auditor for 5 years at a stretch and not on a yearly basis. You don't have to kind of pay the fees every year. I'm not saying the auditor fees, but the statutory fees to file it. You can file in one form for 5 years basically. So this needs to be filed for the first auditor also, which people generally do not do it basically. At the end of the year, you need to quote the acknowledgement number in the annual form, which is filed, for the company in the annual return, basically. So people do not do it and they try to cover it up somehow, basically. Now, this FCGPR is something which is, if you have taken an FDI, let's say you're taking an investment from somebody who is outside India, this is something which you need to file with RBI within 30 days of filing the share allotment. Now, this is something which you should keep in mind for two reasons. One, obviously the due diligence, and there is an interest and penalty applicable if you do not do it, which RBI will calculate and give it to you. But in some cases, if you have not filed it and this is pending, I've handled some cases wherein people had not filed it, and trust me, this becomes a very negative thing for a founder. He might also be called by, I don't know if you've heard of this, we generally see this in the news, ED, Enforcement Directorate. Okay, so people generally link it with fraud, or for that matter, dealing in cash transactions and all, but they have a cell which also selects cases on a sample basis or a random basis for non-compliance in the FEMA act, and one of them being is FCGPR. So there's one client of mine who got a notice for something which he incorporated the entity in 2014 and had not filed the FCGPR, and he got it after 3 years in 2017, and he was harassed like anything by the ED, wherein the person is treated like a criminal, and at the end of it there was a penalty of 2 lakhs each to be, which was paid by both the directors basically, even though nothing was found in the thing. But they'll unearth all your things, all your personal records as a director. They'll ask you to produce all your bank statements, like a proper investigation which you might see in the movies. Okay, so that is something which is, this is the reason we tell that it is just the compliance and there's no payment of standard fee for this to the government, but many people do not do it and it haunts them later. So this is why it is very important compliance when you're taking an FDI. So always keep a tick mark here, when you are actually taking an FDI from anyone basically. And it also is costly, a little bit costly for the startups as well. It will cost you around, I think the bank will charge you around, if I'm not wrong, somewhere between 10,000 to 25,000 as a processing charge. And the professional will charge you somewhere around, somewhere between 20 or 15 to 25,000 or 15 to 30,000 rupees to process this one FCGPR for you.
Prashant, this is also relevant for companies which have Indian one as a subsidiary, right?
Correct, correct. So as I said, I mean, basically any Indian company receiving any shareholding amount or any capital amount from outside, it could be anyone, could be holding company, it could be an individual, or it could be a known friend or whatever, and you're taking it as a in the form of an investment, you need to comply with this provision. So people generally are a little casual about it, especially considering the cost involved in it. And this is something which haunts everyone, and it becomes a big red flag in the due diligence process, basically. Now, this is something which was introduced sometime just before the pandemic. I don't want to get into the total theoretical detail about it because it's obviously a very complex thing. But in simple terms, when you have a company in which somebody is actually owning shares through a non-individual, it could be a partnership firm, could be a private limited entity, or could be a VC firm, somebody who's owning the share of a company, and that person is not an individual, is not a natural human being. It is somebody which is an entity or something which is owning the share in another company in India, basically. Now you need to file the details of, so who, in that case, who is the owner of those companies or those entities? You need to file the details of those, in these forms, basically. So that's why it's called significant beneficial owner. So who is the beneficial owner of the actual shareholding, which is through a VC firm or through a company? Now, obviously, there are certain limits applied to it, like more than 10% of holding, like somebody who's holding the majority share here, and in that entity somebody is owning more than 10%. Like that, there are certain conditions around it which is too complex, but this is something which you should keep in mind, that if some entity in India is having a shareholder who is not a natural human being and is an entity, that entity's details have to be filed within the timeline. Otherwise, there's a huge penalty for not complying with this. Now, government generally for last 1.5 years after its introduction has been basically little relaxed, has given some relaxations because of the pandemic, and then that it was the first time thing and all those things. But this is something which will become an important compliance going forward. So you should always keep this in mind. This is required to be done for every investment which is through these kind of entities, basically. So the other thing is maintenance of statutory registers and minutes of the meeting. Now, this is something which is a theoretical requirement. This will not bother you until you have a due diligence done by anyone. I'm talking about the non-mandatory statutory register updation or minutes of the meeting. So I hope most of you would have heard of that every company who has 2 directors are called as board. Basically, both the directors are called as board, or let's say 2 or 3 or any number of directors are called as board. So single person is a director, multiple person basically form a board. Now you have to have some minutes in every quarter. You need to have theoretically one meeting and just meet and say, okay, everything going on well, everything working fine, and other things which are there. So generally all these things have to be documented. Now these are need not be filed with the ROC, which is the controlling authority for companies, but still needs to be documented. Now ROC, the day they come and ask you, that's when you should prepare and give it to them, basically. So you don't have a compliance as such in day one, but the moment you have a funding and all, because let's say your all other compliances like tax payment, filings, all other filings are correct. Now what will the lawyer of or let's say the CEO or lawyer of the due diligence team find out? So then they go and unearth these small theoretical things which are there where you need to prepare it and all. So this is something which becomes a very important factor theoretically for the due diligence requirement, wherein you should make sure that you are having these things prepared, basically. So most of the cases we go back and prepare it backdated for the startups who are not funded and do not have enough funds to kind of take care of these things in the beginning, basically. Otherwise, if the funded startups are there and all, we kind of recommend them to kind of have these things complied with from day one, because definitely these things will be asked on every quarterly basis or every half yearly basis by the investors team, basically.
Prashant, there's a question in the chat window from Chandan. What about the foreign parent entity transferring money for Indian subsidiaries monthly expenses? What compliances need to be followed?
Yeah, so this is basically, it depends on what is that what do you call arrangement you have set up with the foreign parent entity. If you generally, we recommend you to set up a cost plus arrangement, wherein you can just enter an agreement of let's say monthly expense plus a markup, a certain markup based on the industry. You have to arrive at the markup, and you should raise an invoice for that to the holding company of yours, and they should pay you against that, and you pay the tax on the whatever margin we are putting there. So you need to have three documentation, 3-point documentation to be done here. One is doing an agreement, which is a transfer pricing agreement. Second, you need to raise an invoice, and ensure that you receive the payment against that invoice within 9 months at least. And the third is when your turnover or when your transaction between both the entities is crossing 1 crore in a year, then do something called a transfer pricing study. If it's not crossing 1 crore, then you need not do the transfer price study, but just do the other two things, which is important. Now, a transfer pricing study, why I'm saying is not mandatory and you should not do it when it is not crossing 1 crore is because it's costly. It will cost you somewhere between 75,000 to up to 1.75 lakhs, depending on which industry you are and what analysis needs to be done there. So that's a costly thing, and which you need to do on a year basis. So that's the reason I'm saying you should do it only when it is applicable. But these are the 3 main documentation which is important. From the taxation perspective, you just have to pay tax on the markup which you arrive at. And the study also is done in a manner to kind of arrive at that markup percentage and make sure that you maintain that markup year on year, because that keeps on changing. I mean, there are typical theoretical rules around it, wherein something called safe harbor rule is there, which says if you're into a software development or a software support kind of service, not development exactly, software support and maintenance kind of service, then you should have markups somewhere around 17% and above. This is the latest as per the last year, which is used to be earlier a little less, but now it made it 17% above. If you're into an R&D sector and you're getting funds like that, then the markup could be somewhere around 30% is what you should keep it. So you have to justify that if there is a notice tomorrow from the department, and to get that justification ready, you need to have studies done wherein you compare the rates of the similar companies in the market and their margins and all those things. So it's a typical very detailed study which needs to be done to kind of justify that. So any rate which you choose, you still need to justify it, even if it's a higher rate or a lower rate. If you're into a high rate of markup, the chances of you getting caught for an investment is probably less, but not 100% foolproof. You have to explain it in any case, basically. So I hope this is clear. From the documentation thing, only 3 things: transfer pricing agreement, invoice, and study. That's what. Chandan, you want me to add anything on this, or can I go to the next point?
No, Prashant, thanks a lot. That has been very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So if you see, these are the regular compliances, which I think most of you, if you have been running a company for, let's say, 3 months or so, you would have come across these things, most of the things here. So there is a quarterly or monthly GST return based on the turnover. There is TDS return and TCS return, and along with the monthly tax, TDS and TCS payment, which needs to be done on a regular basis. Then, as I said, the 4 board meetings in a year, every 3 months, you're supposed to have it, and 1 annual general meeting within the 6 months. So this needs to be done. These are theoretical requirements and are mandatory ones, and not the optional ones, basically. So these have to be done. Annual audit, accounting and auditing obviously is a part of it. And then there are certain forms which have been brought up recently, like DPT3 and DI3 KYC, Web KYC, wherein you have to file this on an annual basis every year. And then this is the annual form in which you file your annual return with the ROC, AOC4 and MGT7. So there are 2 days specified for that. From the AGM date, you have to do 30 days AOC4 and MGT7 within 60 days from your AGM date. Generally, the AGM date, people keeps it somewhere around 30th September because they count 6 months from the year end date. So from March, 6 months is September 30th. So that's how. So it falls into October and November, these dates basically. Now, there is one thing which has been brought up for the MSME, wherein this was brought up, last year. This is for people who, not as a vendor, but as a customer to someone. So if you have defaulted in any payment, so I don't know if you would have come across when you're kind of dealing with some, organized entities sending you emails that please confirm if you are an MSME, email when this was introduced, basically. So every half year, every company who actually owes anything to the MSME beyond the 45 days needs to write about why they have delayed the payment, and with the reason. So they will ask you for your PAN, other things. Now they will silently send you a communication which might be so that you don't notice it. So the way the communication is sent to you by a person is, please reply with your with MS, whether you are an MSME or not, with your MSME certificate and PAN. If you don't reply, we will consider you as non-MSME. So by default, you do not qualify for the reporting for them. So similarly, every your company has to do it. Like if let's say I am a MSME and I am raising an invoice to X company, which is one of yours, and you have not paid me beyond 45 days from the day it was due, then you need to, as a company, report, the details of my name, PAN, and why you have delayed the payment. So this was brought recently, though people are not really very rigorously following it, but this is something which is going to be an important thing from the growth of the startups, because MNCs are somebody who kind of dictate terms and they delay the payments. That's the reason this was introduced, basically. So just because of the pandemic, the government has been giving some extension to file certain forms, and that's the reason people are getting time to delay it further. But this is something which will become an important tool if it is continued, in next couple of years or so, to make sure that the smaller entities are not harassed by the bigger entities, basically. But this needs to be filed by everyone, even the smaller entity as well. There is no limit for anyone to not file it. Only thing is, if you don't have a vendor to whom you have not defaulted, then you don't need to file it. If you have a vendor who's, let's say, a non-MSME, then you don't have to file it. But if you have a vendor who is MSME and you have defaulted beyond 45 days, you have to file this every half year, basically. So that's what it is. Annual income tax filing, again, it's mandatory for all the people, irrespective of whichever type of entity you have. Tax audit, again, is basically based on a turnover thing. If your business is a non-cash business, up to 10 crores, you don't have to get the tax audit done, but you need to file your IATR, and the Company Act and the company audit has to be done. But if you have a cash business and your transaction is more in purchase and sales are more than 5% of your total turnover, then you need to file the tax audit even if you have crossed 1 crore of turnover, basically. FLA is something which, as it's clearly mentioned, in FDI and ODI. So when you have a foreign transaction in terms of investment, either here or you have bought a shares of a foreign entity, then you need to file something called an FLA every year with the RBI portal, which is called Firms portal, basically. So again, as I mentioned earlier, annual IAC updation, which has been very recent, they have actually extended the date for the first year now till 31st of August. So in case if you guys have IAC and you have not filed the annual updation, please get it filed, immediately before end of August. They have already extended it twice. From 30th June, they've extended to July, and then from July to August, basically. I don't think they'll extend it further post that, basically. So this is applicable from this year onwards. It was not there earlier. Annual shop and establishment return. This is again state specific, depends where you are, which state you are. Telangana, and Hyderabad, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka, what do you call, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra have an annual return filing. We are already doing this for all the clients. So the annual return filing is required for shop and establishment also. If you do not do it, your annual subscription, license might end, and you might see a labor law inspector standing in front of your office, giving you something, giving you some, good wishes, saying that tomorrow I will shut down your office, basically. Generally, these people wait for some time so that you accumulate things, and then they reach to you. So this is something which you should do. If you file it annually, they're not going to bother you. You don't have to pay any tax or any cash or anything to be compliant or to make the filing. So there's no like nothing like income tax wherein you have to pay some tax to file the return. The simple filing, you should do it to avoid unnecessary headaches from the labor law inspector, basically. Now, ECB is something which is like very not much favorable in case of the startups. Favorable in a sense, basically not many startups are doing this, wherein you borrow things from outside, and there's a lot of compliance involved in doing external commercial borrowing. So not many, I would say 1 in 1,000 startup might be going for ECB route, but I just written it wherein you have to do the filing if you have taken an ECB from someone, basically. But we generally do not advise startups to take ECB. Rather, we say that take it in the form of, rather than loan, take it in the form of investment, and do a transfer pricing arrangement for purchase and sales transaction to avoid this additional compliance, because this is very costly affair as well for the compliance part, basically. Now, this is something share capital audit which has been brought up recently, but it is not applicable to most of the startups. It is applicable for public entities which are not listed. Generally, the startups are falling into the private limited entities, so that's why it's not applicable. But it's a theoretical requirement which has been introduced recently, basically.
Hey, Prashant, Ravi, yes, please go ahead and ask the question. Hey, Ravi has
Prashant, hi, this is Ravi from Sterile Biosystems. So there is a company in the US which is interested in essentially marketing the product in our product in the US, but instead of an investment, they would like to sort of structure, basically give us some amount of money which we need as a loan, as a project loan, essentially, for a period of 3 years. I have 2 questions regarding this. One is, can we take a loan, an ECB essentially, from a US company, not an NBFC, but a company directly? The second part of it is, what is the least amount of interest that we can basically have on this?
See, interest part is something which is like is driven through the FEMA regulation, but see, that's what I said. Generally, for a startup, I would not advise to take it as ECB. We've kind of done this analysis for a couple of cases in past, wherein what happens is you end up like reporting all the transactions on a periodical basis to RBI, and it's a very it's a too much of headache for you to because you cannot reach RBI directly. You have to go through the bank, and generally with the banks and all, people keep on changing, and you lose a track of it, and the reporting gets delayed all the time. So you will always be falling into a criteria, because for this reporting and compliance, that's why I said it's a compliance issue oriented scheme, wherein you have a dependency on bank. You don't have a direct reporting to the RBI, and for all the delays, whatever happens, that will fall on you only, even if bank has delayed it. That the way they present the case and all, because they say we have sent an email, we have spoken verbally. So generally the notices are not sent to the bank. They do, though maybe I would say in some cases the banks also get notices from RBI, but in most of the cases they are left, and the whole owners, even if you see a delay, they will clearly write that to follow up with the bank, it is your headache, basically. So generally that's the whole reason we say that until unless we have a very a strict process around it, wherein somebody is sitting in the bank, wherein I can put make a call and make sure all the documentations are happening on time. We do not recommend you to do ECBs, because the compliance becomes a very you have to do the filing every month, basically, about interest and other things which is there. So it gets delayed. So if you ask me personally as an advisor, I generally never recommend any startup to go for ECB. Rather, I recommend them that go for an investment route, and take the money in the form of obviously you'll end up paying some tax on it, but still that's less than the compliance cost, and more than that, you don't have to repay it back, basically. That way. So do not, because they have in the US, they have structure of giving something as a note, basically. They'll say, okay, take it and then return it to me with this. So even if it's a known entity, they would still prefer to give you as loan. Now Indian government has been made in a manner wherein if you are taking money, they are very happy. If you are returning, that's where they have compliances associated with that, basically.
Understood.
So That's why we generally recommend take in the form of FDI, because that gives you the cushion of doing the compliance only once and just one annual filing, wherein you don't have to go and report about the value of transaction all the time. You just have to report about like what is the total of state of affairs of the company, which is the FLA, I'm telling you. Okay.
Right.
So that's what we generally do not recommend doing ACBs basically.
Understood. And on the first question, right? So can we take an ECB from a company directly in the US?
Company in US like India company taking the ECB from US, no, basically. That's what
Yeah,
I said,
ECB from a US company. It's not a bank, but it's a company.
yeah, that is possible, subject to the FEMA guidelines, wherein they have put a condition about what is the net worth. Okay, what is the net of the worth of the company here. So based on that basically criteria, it is eligible. Okay.
Understood.
We tried doing it for a entity for US in Pune actually. Okay. Eventually the net worth qualification was not happening basically. Okay.
Okay.
So they will tell you to then when you go to the bank, and practical issue I'm telling you, to get a ECB sanction, they will tell you to have some association in the form of a JV or something like a there are two terms. One is JV and the other is actually owning some shares in that basically. Okay. So to create some kind of KYC for the bank basically. That's why it becomes a little fishy, because you have to keep on reporting every time basically. So that's the reason we, if you're directly taking from an entity, we generally discourage that as a professional.
Understood. Okay.
So yeah, so if you look at it, towards the end of it, so if you look at it, annual performance return is something when you are actually kind of investing in an entity, or some entity has invested, in your, let's say even if you're doing an investment in the form of a individual, so you still need to file it, in certain cases when it is crossing your LRS limit, basically total. So you have to file the annual performance return every June, which they generally extend. Like last year, they made it December, basically. So you have to file a form called ODI. So this is like if you have invested in an entity outside India, you're supposed to file an annual performance report, in which you have to get it certified by, there are total 6 sections in that. So the first section talks about the type of entity. Second section talks about what all details are there, like what is the kind of transaction it is. And the third and fourth are more of a theoretical thing, wherein most of things is not applicable to you. But fifth is wherein you give a declaration, and the CA also certifies, your auditor certifies your net worth and all for you to do it every year. So that's where basically this is something which is applicable in case of ODI. When you're investing in a shares through your entity outside India, you need to file an ODI form. So so ODI is to be filed at 2 levels. When you're investing, that time the bank will not process. The legal way to do an investment in outside India entity is to do through bank, and the bank would not process until you fill the ODI form. This needs to be submitted with the bank. That is one. And second, once you have invested, every year you need to file a form which is called annual performance report, or in the short term APR basically. Now 3CEB and 10IC is something which is related to the if you have done a transaction through related enterprise, which could be a holding entity or any kind of relation which is defined as per the Income Tax Act. But if 2 entities are related and you've done a transaction and transfer pricing is applicable, you have to file annual return form in the tax thing, which is 3CEB every year. And this is certified by, the form is certified by your auditor, and the company has to approve it. So this is one of the other documentation which needs to be done for the transfer pricing thing, which I think Saket had asked. But this is something which is a compliance as such, not the day-to-day operations basically. So this is an annual, along with the annual audit, we need to file it. And 10IC is also related to transaction between the related enterprises based on certain limits. But yeah, if there are 2 entities dealing with in terms of commercial nature and they're related, you need to file these 2 forms every year by 31st of October. Now, this is director's interest and disqualification needs to be disclosed. So this is basically every year as a part of the, again, as I mentioned earlier, in the company secretarial compliance, every year as a part of the declaration that you are, which all companies you are owning shares, you need to disclose in the entity in which you're director basically, or which all companies you're director, you need to disclose it in this thing. Theoretically, you need to disclose it to the board every first meeting. and then they are supposed to approve it in the board. So generally people do not do it at the startup level, the beginning level, until they are funded, and this is something people go and do it backdated. But this is again a theoretical requirement which needs to be done every year. So these were like the yearly compliances which all the organizations should do. Now I have just summarized this, though this is a very detailed thing, due diligence, but I've summarized into 10 main points, and there are like very like subtopics to this, wherein you need to make sure that you adhere to that to comply with the due diligence for a further in future investments if you're taking. So these are very simple things if you look at it. So one is corporate information. So what I'm trying to explain here is what all things you should prepare yourself for, so that you're ready for the due diligence in the investment rounds. So one is you need to make sure that whatever we have spoken in the past 5 slides, in the earlier 5 slides, those are all summarized here. And this is something which becomes a key point for you to make sure that you comply with all these things. So corporate information, like you should have your registrations and licenses, whatever is applicable to you, updated with the updated address and all everything, and you should have them. Otherwise those becomes a CP or a CS, condition precedent and condition subsequent, depending on generally this will become CPs in the due diligence, wherein they will want you to do this, and then only they will grant you the tranche basically for the investment. So that is one. So which this includes everything like a MOA, AOA, incorporation certificate, your registered office, all the documents which talk about your company's existence with different departments, be it here or be it anywhere basically. Okay, so this is something which is one thing. Second thing is something related to your share capital and ESOP related documents. So what it means is, obviously if you've allotted shares to anyone, you should have all the the past 3 forms, a share capital structure. First of all, to start with, share capital structure, past 3 forms with the acknowledgements which you have used to file the share capital allotment in past, your basically your all share certificates, copies, which they will ask you for. ESOP if you have given to anyone, so ESOP documentation like scheme, and if you had filed it with the authorities, so that form they'll ask for MGT 14 related to that. So this is again an important document for the DD. Third thing is, this is something which is a very straightforward thing. They will ask you to write something about your business, give a brief write-up about your business with the key functions and key dependency on the key people, what all activities it is there and how it is, and most importantly how your revenue model works, because as an investor they are more interested in at any point of time how you're going to generate revenue, and if you're already generating revenue, how you're generating it. So because when you go to something like a Series A or a Series B round, definitely they're going to actually analyze your complete revenue model process, which means from the day you find a customer till the time you realize the money in your bank account, they will ask you for each and every event, and they will ask you to prove that in the books of account also. Okay, so I have personally got faced these questions from the big fours and all, when they're like in the time of let's say Series A or pre-Series B or Series B, wherein we have been asked to show transaction wise money from Razorpay, if it's a payment gateway model we use, the client was using. So how we raised an invoice and how the service was rendered from that invoice raise date, when the payment was received. Let's say it was received through payment gateway, then reconcile payment gateway to their bank account. So the complete thing, the flow we had to prepare and we had to give, and at the same time show them a sample transaction for each kind of revenue model in the books of account. Have you recorded it in the manner you should record, and you are documenting it? So this is again a very important thing, because if your revenue model doesn't match with what is being recorded in your books of account, then this becomes a red flag again in the due diligence. So this is why you should be very careful and make sure that all the recordings in the accounts are also matching with the practical revenue model you're showing to the investors basically. Then the next point is company secretarial compliances. Again, this is a theoretical thing. As I said, if everything is fine, the person who is kind of checking your records has to find out something. So they will get into the theoretical things which are not mandatory but theoretically required to be maintained. And this is where most of the people will generally become CPs, wherein they will push you to comply with this. So this will not stop your compliance until it's a very big issue, but this will delay your investment basically. So this is again a very important factor when you are kind of preparing for yourself for a due diligence activity. Now, same thing is labor law compliances. So again, labor law means I'll tell you there are total 143 acts which are there in India for labor law, which they've tried to kind of sum up into 4 labor code bills which have recently come. Most of it is not applicable, but you will be surprised to see what are they prepared, what are they enacted for and all, like a Equal Remuneration Act or a Labor Welfare Fund and all. Those are not even relevant, but these are prepared just for the sake of it, So again, in the due diligence, they'll go after all those things. They'll ask you for all those things, depending on which level of investment you are into. So if you're at a seed level and all, they will not really kind of push you for this. But if you're going for, let's say, Series A or pre-Series A, definitely they're going to ask you all these things. Most of it is not applicable, but you need to prepare it and submit it to them, basically. So that is there. And then, the financial and the tax compliance, this is something which is a very general thing, which I think all of you are aware. And, a slide before this explained what all things it is. Basic thing, have you discharged all your taxes? Have you filed all your returns, tax returns on time and all? There's no penalty in any of the tax filings and all. These are things they will check, and they'll ask you to verify, they'll ask you to produce to them, and they'll verify and ask you counter questions on that, basically. So that is there. Now, some contracts and agreements with your employees, NDAs, vendors, with whom you are dealing. So key vendor agreements is what they're going to ask you for. So generally, look at your vendor list, and you should try to kind of, get them documented, because this also becomes a factor, basically. So this is something we should emphasize on, when you're kind of preparing yourself for due diligence activity. And then IP documentation is something which is depending on whether you're creating an IP or you're doing something which is unique and you want to protect it, as an idea, then they would be interested to look into these documents and find out from the protections level as to, are you really protecting it? So they will go deep into this, wherein we are going to ask you for, at what level of, application you are into. Is it approved, or is it filed, or is it what it is, in whose name it is? So they would want you to transfer it to the company name in which they are, they're going to invest, basically. Some investors, some founders, what they do is they take this IP documentation in the name of company as well as in their name, become a co-applicant. So they will push you to come out of push you individually to come out of the IP ownership, and they will try to ask you to transfer it to the company. So then it becomes a taxation matter as well, because if it is a very value created to that IP, we generally recommend you to avoid that, avoid putting your name in the initial stage, because tomorrow if there's a value created, you might also have an income tax obligation on you, but when you're transferring that IP right to the company completely. So that is one more thing. Litigations, obviously, it's very simple as the term goes for. Is there an outstanding litigation or a litigation which had happened in past, and what was the reply done for? So you need to maintain a record of all the litigations which the company has gone through, whether it is outstanding or closed. In both the cases, you need to maintain a record of it to ensure that you fulfill this requirement. This is definitely going to be there in the list when they ask you for the DD requirement. Now, valuation report is more of something which is not a requirement for the DD, but they would want you to do one if you're not done, for the sake of after they put in the money, you have to file something called allotment of shares, and for that the theoretical requirement is there to have a merchant banker certificate or a registered and registered valuer certificate. So registered valuer is required from the Company Act perspective, and merchant banker is required from the Income Tax Act perspective. So this is something which again they'll make it as a CP thing, because they will not put the money until you have this, basically. So these are the points. If you count it, these are 10 points. All 10 of them are mandatory. There's nothing optional in this. So this is something which you should keep in mind when you think of even taking a professional, investment from a professional investor. So this is definitely going to be there. So if you do not have anything like this, don't even think about taking an investment from a professional investor. Stick to the angel investors and take a Startup India exemption, basically. So this is what it is. I think I tried summarizing because it was a 1 hour discussion. So I thought, I just try to keep things to the minimal and the basics, so that you guys have a little bit of understanding about how it goes for the final due diligence activity and all. Because that's just, I think most of the startups here or anywhere obviously are thinking about investment at a certain point of time, and that's where these things become important. So I think that's what it is. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us, on the details given here. I will send this slide to Naveen, who can circulate it with you. But yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, please shoot it to me.
Prashant, quick question. So I know for this institutional funding requires a lot of due diligence, but angel investment on the other hand is easier. But what are the pitfalls generally that we often miss that can lead to complications in future rounds? Like let's say if someone says I'll just take 50 lakhs from someone for the time being and later convert it to equity.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So basically, these matters obviously become important only when you have an institutional funding coming at later stage. But these are one of the things, like, if you've got the money from somebody who's an angel. I have like recently, recently, but last 1 year or so, especially I'm saying Hyderabad startup people who have approached me, I see as common trend, like, though I cannot quantify the general issues, because those are out of these things only. But the very common point which I noticed was, people used to say, I am an investor in an entity, and they have given some 50 lakhs, 1 crore to the entity, and they never have shares allotted against that. And they just thought that I have given the money, so that means I am the investor there, basically. So that it is important for you to, immediately do the compliance of share allotment as soon as you invest in the entity, or you receive an investment in your entity. To within 60 days of the receiving the money, you should do the filing and issue the share certificates and pay stamp duty on the share certificates. So these are very small things which are there. I mean the problem here is, for me to quantify one thing which is very critical is very difficult here. But I can tell something like, what things basically on case to case basis, wherein people have questions, as you rightly pointed out, that this is a very common error which most of the startups have done, especially in the Hyderabad circle, I'm telling you, basically. So 4 to 5 people actually have kind of called me and have told the same thing, and wherein they have put the money, but there's no share certificate given to them. And even if share certificate given, there's no proper filing done for them. So fortunately for them, last year in the pandemic, the government had given an extension to file the forms backdated, basically not backdated, but file the forms without a late fee. And we could kind of correct it for some people. But yeah, I mean, that is a very important point, that if you've got an investment from somebody, immediately kind of issue the shares and kind of give the share certificate. If you do not issue within, let's say, 330 days, then you have to pay, you cannot go back. You have to go to the ROC, file through for condonation of delay, take a prior approval, and then do it. So correcting it becomes a very long process. At the same time, a cost also increases for that compliance. So that's what, but
Got it.
One particular thing, if you ask me, I can highlight like 3-4 important points. One is the share allotment. Second is, taking LUT, because some people, it's a very basic thing, people do not take it. Okay. So LUT. Third is like, obviously when you're taking an FDI, so file the, FCGPR, or let's say you have transferred shares to a non-resident, or a non-resident has transferred to you, file an FCTRS. So anything which is related to, Company Act and FEMA, those are some things which will not attract any commercial transaction for you to comply with, for that matter, like paying a tax or anything. But if you don't comply, the penalty is huge, basically.
Got it,
And
got it.
sometimes you cannot go back and correct it also, basically.
Got it, got it. So Prashant, does it make sense if we'll circulate your presentation, and if anyone wants to set up like 15-20 minutes on your calendar, we'll ask them if they're interested, if they have any particular questions they wanted to discuss, like probably this next week. We'll be, and most of them, I think, either will get ready for funding in few months or 2 to 3 months down the line. But we can just circulate this. If anyone wants to have a further discussion, I will reach out to you, and
Sure.
probably we can set up a time on your calendar for discussion.
Yeah, just that next week I'm not available. I'll be kind of on leave, but I think anytime post next week, if anyone is interested, yeah, we can do that. That's not a problem.
Okay, okay, sounds good. Are there any questions? Otherwise, we can wrap it up. I think it's past 6:30. Oh, I didn't even realize. Cool. Prashant, thanks so much for the time. I will circulate this in the group, and based on the questions received or anyone requesting for a follow-up discussion, I will reach out to you post next week.
Sure, sure.
Thanks again, Prashant. Thanks so much. Really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
everyone.
Thanks, Prashant.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot, Prashant.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.